Hey there everyone, it's DM Rawlings, the 10-Minute DM. I'm an experienced Forged in the Dark GM, and I'm here to offer some advice 10 minutes at a time. Today, we're going to bust into the fantastic world of Forged in the Dark clocks. So, what are clocks, you might ask? Well, clocks are round progress bars that come in several flavors. Your 4-part, your 6-part, and your 8-part. And basically how we use them is whenever we want to track something, we track the progress by filling in slices of that pie until it gets full, and then the thing that happens at the end of the track happens. So they let us use problems that are far too complex for a single roll in Candela Obscura. They help us foreshadow doom and a heck of a lot more. But an important note before we get too deep into this, the quick start rules for Candela Obscura does not have clocks in it. I really strongly suspect, though, that some kind of clock mechanic is going to be in the final game. And even if they don't, clocks are one of the coolest things in Blades in the Dark, so let's talk about how you can use them in your game. Any game, really, including Dungeons & Dragons or whatever else. So, the first clock that I want to talk about is the progress clock. Reason is, it's the most straightforward. We use them whenever there's a task that's too large to resolve in a single action roll. And progress clocks come down to having two primary traits. There's a goal that you're going to write down when you make the clock, and then there's going to be a size of that clock. And that size is going to vary depending on how big or complex the goal is. So if it's larger than a single action but not particularly large, maybe you go 4. If it's an extremely complex task, maybe you go 8. And every time that you make progress towards that goal, you're just going to start adding ticks to that clock, as you can see here on the left. And then when that clock fills, you get exactly what you want. So, some tips. We don't know what clocks in Candela Obscura are going to be, but one of the things that we can do is inform players that you're making a clock before they make an action roll or start a project, just so they have transparency, so they know what's up, so that they're able to assess and change their mind if they think that it's too complex. So in terms of how much we should be marking the clock, on average I'm going to suggest marking 2 ticks of the clock. But if the approach they take is particularly poor, not going to be effective in this situation given the information at hand or the skill that they maybe apply towards it, we can just mark 1. And if the approach would be disproportionately effective, we can mark 3 ticks. And that's like you're using water on fire kind of thing, where you're getting a proper match. And this is a reflection of something in Blades in the Dark called effect, which really is just a measure of how effective an action is going to be. So a couple things to remember. We should be avoiding repeat rolls. Let other characters contribute with their own skill set in resolving these challenges. So if one person makes a roll to, I don't know, pick a lock or something like that, then maybe we can have another character just spotting and trying to make sure that no one sneaks up on them while they're doing that deed. And again, if the goal is too small, if the goal is small enough that a single roll can resolve it, then there's just no need for a clock at all. So a few example progress clocks. Maybe you need to find a magic idol that's in this busy warehouse that just has many, many boxes. It's going to take you a while to break that down, and who knows what's going to happen in the meantime. You might have some kind of code that the cultists are using to communicate. Maybe you want to break that code. That might be overly complex, or that might need some additional tools. Maybe you need to bind a rampaging djinn back into its lantern. Djinn are powerful spirits. It's probably not something you're going to be able to do in a single roll. Or you might, in downtime, just decide that you want to infuse an item with some arcane power. We can talk about downtime a little bit more in the future. Second clock are danger clocks. These are very similar to progress clocks, except when you get to the end of them, something bad happens. We use these to count up towards calamity. And we're going to be ticking clocks whenever your characters suffer a consequence, and that consequence could conceivably tick that clock, or some kind of event occurs that fits the fiction that may cause the clock to increase. And when that clock is filled, then the bad things happen. Just like progress clocks, danger clocks have two aspects. They also have a name for the problem or obstacle, and then they have a size. And the complexity of the clock is going to vary depending on how dangerous the outcome could be, how dangerous or deleterious the obstacle is, maybe how imminent the danger is. Again, as a storyteller, you're going to be filling these out ad hoc as you approach games, or approach the game and see consequences. So some tips. Again, we're guessing at how clocks are going to be ported over, but I'm pretty confident that I get it here, because in Blades in the Dark, there is something called position, and that translates pretty much one-to-one with stakes in Candela Obscura. So if the stakes are low, then a consequence is probably going to mark 1 tick on the danger clock. If the stakes are normal, consequence could mark 2, and if the stakes are high, then a consequence could mark 3 ticks in one go. And it's also worth noting that some PC decisions could also cause ticks to get added to a danger clock. So you can imagine a situation where a civilian is found in the middle of a dangerous situation, and the adventurers decide they want to get the civilian out before they experience some kind of worse harm. So as a GM, at that point, you can offer a choice to the characters. You can either get this person out of harm's way, but if you do, I'm going to mark a tick on this Abyssal Awakening clock. Or alternatively, you can push forward with them as part of the group, or left in this area, possibly vulnerable to damage, but the choice is up to the players. And really, that's just showing that the passage of time could be dangerous in this situation. So here's a few examples of danger clocks. Maybe the Exoteric Order of New Scientists finds something. That would be more like a progress faction goal. Maybe the Noble's Guards find you. Maybe a powerful spirit crosses the thinning. Or maybe the warehouse that you're in burns down. All possible with danger clocks. Next up, we have racing clocks. And these are actually 2 clocks, or maybe even more clocks. We use them when 2 or more sides are competing for a goal that only one can achieve. So most often a race, but there are other considerations as well. Each side makes progress towards their own clock as they get closer to the goal. Maybe that's with an action roll, maybe it's with a consequence that you suffer. It really depends on how the action happens. If one of the PCs is controlling a clock, they would be making an action roll. If an NPC is in the other group, then consequences would be pushing theirs. Whoever fills the clock first gets the thing, and if both sides fill at the same time, then they're going to meet basically at the end and have a confrontation about it. A few tips. Racing clocks can be asymmetrical. There may be one side that's just better set up to succeed, so they may have a 6 clock while you have an 8 clock, or something else. And I will note, this is a way that you could handle PvP. Like, imagine a situation where 2 acolytes are competing for the favor of their mentor. Then they would be racing each other to get some bit of research done first. It's also a way to handle environmental situations, like maybe you're searching a ship before it sinks because it's taking on water. And there are just so many examples that you can think of here, like maybe you're trying to get to an arcane site before your rivals that also happen to know the location. Maybe you're trying to impress a haughty countess before she tires of you. Maybe you're trying to close a thinning before some ancient evil escapes. Or maybe you're trying to get out of a trapped tomb before it collapses because, those old tombs, they collapse all the time. There are other clocks as well. I tend to use them very sparingly because most of them are just variations on clocks that we already have. There are things like linked clocks, which are used for extremely complex tasks that are just too big for a single clock. My advice there is, rather than have like 2 6-part clocks, instead break the task down into something more achievable in a single clock. With mission clocks, it's really just a special kind of danger clock related to the assignment, where as the mission clock builds, things get more complex. It could be a tug-of-war clock, where it lets you fill or empty the clock based on events that are happening. I don't like tug-of-war clocks. I don't like taking ticks away. I'd rather use a racing clock, personally. It almost always makes sense. Then there are long-term project clocks, And as much as I always encourage characters to have ambitions outside of the assignments that they're on, long-term projects are basically just a special kind of progress clock that work on a larger time scale, so I just really consider them progress clocks. Then there are faction clocks, which are like while your PCs are busy doing whatever it is that they're doing, it's not like other groups are just sitting on their thumbs, twiddling them, waiting for something to happen. Instead, a faction clock can be used to tick towards some kind of progress that they're making if they're allied with you, or some kind of danger if they intend to oppose you. Right. Some thoughts on naming here. I think clock names, you should strive to be mysterious. A couple of reasons for that. One is it surprises your players. They don't know exactly what's up. But the other one is that it opens up more space for you to change the answer depending on what is the most narratively interesting at the time. So if you commit to a clock name that is too prescriptive, then you're going to be forced to do that, and that may not be what's best for the story at the time. So a few examples. They find you. But who are they? It's not written down, so it doesn't exist yet. You could go with something like as was foretold. Well, we don't know what that prophecy is. It could be anything. Or it could be, and this is something that I really love, you can throw out problems that you don't even have answers for. So it could be something like learn true name. And like, how do you do that? It's up to the players to figure that out. Right? Clock names should be about the obstacle and not the method. So instead of saying, like naming a clock, sneak past the guards, it's patrolling guards. Right? You're not telling your players that they need to sneak past them. Maybe they'll, I don't know, use some kind of charm, some kind of magic. Maybe they'll take the guards out with violence, like who's to say? And if you make prescriptive clocks, then you're going to get prescriptive answers, and you should be trying to keep that field as open as possible. Right? Instead of saying pick the lock, instead use floor safe. Or instead of banish Shukandi, a spirit of some kind, it's contain Shukandi. Maybe you make a deal with the spirit to appease it, rather than having to go through the effort of banishing it. Lastly, clock names should be evocative. They should be something that you write down that imminently lets the players know that there's some kind of great peril that they're in. And it can be really fun to throw something down and startle the players with. So you could have a danger clock like you're discovered. You could have a progress clock called Earn Baron Ramiel's Trust. Could be something as easy as it escapes. And that's probably not good, right? Or my absolute favorite is just put down a clock, and the clock is a progress clock that says survive. There's no other goal here than to just make it out of this situation. There are some variations that we can talk about here as well. There's a game called Slug Blasters, which is about hoverboarding teenagers who break into other dimensions and get into trouble. They use letters instead of ticks. So it's not clocks, it's letters. And this mimics games like Horse or Skate. Alternatively, you could just use checkboxes, you could give out poker chips, or if you're in person, you could just put out a number of M&Ms equal to the size of the clock, and every time that a clock ticks, then you're going to eat one of those M&Ms. They can also have sub-effects. So as you're filling a clock, maybe you reach certain thresholds, and then the situation changes. There's a game called External Containment Bureau, which is about modern paranormal investigators, kind of like the SCP Foundation or the Control video game. And they have a mission clock, and once that mission clock reaches a certain point, things start going weird. The reality itself can change, new threats arrive, civilians can get caught in way over their head, and the situation just gets worse, which encourages you as a player to make sure that you're driving towards resolving the situation before something too bad happens. So, yeah, in closing, I don't know if clocks are going to be in Candela Obscura, but whether they are or not, I think that they're a really valuable tool to learn as a storyteller, dungeon master, game master, whatever, because it's a cool mechanic that can be ported into literally every game to handle complex situations. So thank you very much for your time. I've been DM Rawlings, the 10-Minute DM. Good luck with your clocks, and if you found this valuable, please hit subscribe for me.